tortured ears there sounds unceasingly a nightmare whirring and flapping, and a faint, distant baying as of some gigantic hound. It is not dream, it is not, I fear, even madness, for too much has already happened to give me these merciful doubts. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and gender non-conforming friends. My name is Andrew Carr, and welcome back to the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft. Oh, you're probably wondering where my TV went. The simple answer: we're just sort of switching around stuff in my room. Actually, you will also notice, if you can see it, the let me get it in shot there. The bookshelf is gone too, but well, not gone, but like the book. We're doing some restructuring here in my bedroom. So that's all really going on. It's just wanted to mention that. Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about the Hound. And I have to say, the Hound is probably one of the scariest H.P. Lovecraft stories I've ever read in this series. And considering some of the stories that we've read already in this series, that says a lot. That this is one of the scariest ones. And I'm going to tell you why this is one of the scariest ones. And the reason that it's one of the scariest ones is that, well, let's get into the story. The story is basically about, well, there's no other real way to put it. These two sick, degenerate bastards who, basically, they don't really seek much pleasure. They don't really find much pleasure in everything else in life. And the reason I call them degenerates is because they've now turned to grave robbing as a pleasure in life, and they gain things from. Actually, I'm gonna show you how sick these two characters are. Our narrator and his friend Saint John. I'm going to tell you how messed up this is. It starts off somewhat normal. It's like, oh, it's a deep, well, normal in quotes. It starts off. It's like a thing. It's like a staircase with I'm guessing like statues of gargoyles and daemons and stuff. Here's where it gets messed up though. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely, lifelike bodies, perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermist's art, and with headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes, and heads preserved in various stages of dissolution. There one might find the rotting bald pates of famous noblemen, and the fresh and radiantly golden heads of newly buried children. Jesus Christ, Lovecraft. God. So we're dealing with some degenerates in this story. And basically, they go to this churchyard, which says there's some curses there, which is always a good idea. And they do some grave robbing, and they take this green jade amulet, which comes with it the curse of hearing incessant baying as of some giant hound, as the story constantly says. And it gets worse and worse and worse for them from there. Now you can kind of see why I say this is one of the scariest H.P. Lovecraft stories. I will say, because it brings up green jade, and as I was kind of going through the story to sort of see how long it would be in reading it and such, I saw the green jade. I was like, oh. And knowing Lovecraft, if you've watched this series for long enough, you'll know that Lovecraft can get a bit racy. It is a bit uncomfortable to read some of his descriptions when he's talking about the green jade amulet when they first find it. Certain descriptions and how he mentions some sort of cult in Central Asia in a place called Leng. So that's a bit kind of iffy to read. Um, so I wanted to throw that out there, just throw that out of the way, just because that was something that kind of jumped out at me when reading the story. Not to just as a point that stuff is there if you read the story, which I do recommend, but keep in mind that it is in there, and that it would be very foolish of me to not at least mention it. So anyway, as for the story itself, well, as I just said, it's one of as I just said, it's one of the freakiest things I've ever read from Lovecraft, because it's dealing, I think, with characters who are, because typically in a Lovecraft story you find characters who are antiquarians or scientists, characters who want to study these things or are fascinated by them. As we've seen in the Dream Quest or the Dreamland stories, we've sort of come across dreamers and their powers and livid dreams, and sort of going from, like, sort of, I guess, dreams, like dream logic and how it applies to them. Here we just straight up have just degenerate, horrible people as the main characters. And I think it's really interesting because I think this is also one of the goriest H.P. Lovecraft stories. Like, typically Lovecraft is very vague about some of the gore and violence in his stories. It's always kind of implied, or like it's told to you in just kind of details, like, oh, it's a particularly red scene. It's like, oh, or sanguine stuff and whatnot. It's very much hinted at, but never explicitly stated. Here, there's straight up descriptions of characters being literally torn to shreds, and yeah. Again, and it's just, and I love the whole psychological thing, because there's a very interesting thing about the baying of the hound, the titular hound, if you will. The hound is almost always described at the baying of the hound, the oh, like that stuff is always kind of described as they can hear it, but they can't really place where it's coming from. They don't really know if it's even real, like if it's in their heads or if it's something going on, and things start happening after they steal this jade amulet, and things really start, and the baying just gets worse, and as Lovecraft stories go, as well as being incredibly violent, it's also probably one of the darkest H.P. Lovecraft endings I've ever read. I won't go into spoilers, but it is a bit of a harrowing ending. And yeah, again, this story just really, really freaked me out. I'm sure you can clearly tell. Actually, an interesting passage though in this story was here when and here's kind of a spoiler-ish. Then terror came. On the night of September 24th, I heard a knock at my chamber door. Fancying it St. John's, I bade the knocker enter, but was answered only by a shrill laugh. Horror Babble actually did a great thing where when it says the shrill laugh, there's actually like a creepy laugh they play afterwards. It was really creepy. I really liked that little touch. But when I heard again going back to the passage, I heard a knock at my chamber door. I couldn't help but be reminded of Once Upon a Midnight Dreary, as I sat weak and weary, came a rapping at my chamber door, or the Raven. It reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, basically. Yeah, so I just thought that was a cool little thing. It just sort of came to me as I was reading that passage. So yeah, so that's the Hound. There's not really many references to Actually, there is. There's a reference to the Necronomicon again. So we're a good old return of the Necronomicon by Abdul El-Hazred. That makes an appearance and is actually referenced quite extensively in this story. I guess there's not much else. I guess because I know that in the Dreamlands there's a place called the Plateau of Lang. So I don't know if the Lang mentioned in this story and the Plateau of Lang are the same thing. But there's a place in the Dreamlands. I think it's actually gone into in Dream-Quest of Unknown Kadath. There's a place called the Plateau of Lang. So I don't know if the Langs, again, I don't know if the Lang in this story and the Plateau of Lang are the same place. Maybe they are. I don't know. We'll get there when we get to Dream-Quest. But as for now, the Hound is really friggin' freaky. Again, there is that little bit there involving the green jade, and because I know that jade has a lot of some sort of cultural significance, I believe. I might be wrong on that. I'm open to hearing about it. I might even do some research while editing this and put it like here. But I know that jade's very important, so I was kind of like, ooh, we're getting racy here. Are we getting racy here? It kind of does a little bit. It's still there, so I am recommending the story. But again, it would be foolish of me to not at least acknowledge that stuff is in here, albeit mentioned briefly, but still it is indeed in there. So, as for the Hound, I'm gonna give this a high A or low S because it freaked me out. I've never shuddered this bad in a H.P. Lovecraft story since like the Dunwich Horror. What else can I say about it? So yeah, so this was a really good story. It's also a cool like sort of a curse ghost story too. So if you're really into like ghost stories or curse stories or that sort of thing, you can't go wrong with the Hound. Again, just keep in mind that stuff is in there that I've mentioned already. So, with that being said, our next story next time for the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft will be one titled Hypnos. So next week, ladies, gentlemen, and gender non-conforming people, is the story Hypnos. My name is Andrew Carr LLC. Andrew Carr, not Andrew Carr LLC. Andrew Carr. This has been the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft. And until then, see y'all later. Bye.